I calculated the loads in buildings for 37 years, and I was good at it. You take a wall, you measure it, you understand exactly how much weight it can absorb before the whole thing fails. That precision kept people safe. That precision kept structures standing. When I turned 64, I thought about what I'd built, and I realized most of it would outlast me by centuries. I wasn't sure what I'd built for myself. Thailand seemed like the right answer. I'd visited once on vacation, and something about the pace felt like relief. No more blueprints, no more liability, no more pretending the margins between safe and catastrophic were wider than they actually were. I found a small house in Phuket, not far from the water, and I settled into a life that looked like retirement in every photograph I sent back to Canada. Now, the expat community there was large enough that you could disappear into it, but small enough that people noticed when you were alone. I wasn't actively unhappy. I was just aware that happiness and solitude weren't the same thing, and I'd spent most of my career choosing solitude because it was safer than the alternative. The thing about being 64 and alone is that you notice it, even when you're trying not to. The bars and the tourist zones didn't appeal to me. I watched younger men work those circuits, and I recognized something predatory in it that I didn't want to be part of. I wasn't looking for anything transactional or temporary. I was looking for something that felt like partnership, real partnership. A woman who had her own problems and wasn't performing contentment for a camera. That sounds wise in hindsight. At the time, it felt like realism. It felt like the only honest way forward. I met her at a convenience store in Patong on a Tuesday evening in October. She was working the shift that started at 5 and ended at midnight, counting the register with a kind of focused attention that suggested she cared about accuracy in a way most people didn't. Her name was Niran, but she told me most foreign customers called her Anne because they couldn't pronounce her full name, and she'd stopped correcting them years ago. Her English was limited but functional. She was 26. She had a quiet way about her that I read, at the time, as depth. Now I understand it was exhaustion. She was working double shifts because her father had cirrhosis, and the medical costs were swallowing her family's income. She mentioned this to me on the third time I came in, not as a hardship story, but as context. This is what her life was. No performance, no preamble, just the facts of her situation laid out like inventory. I asked her to dinner. She said yes. This surprised me, and I said so. She told me most foreign men who asked her to dinner were looking for something specific, and she wasn't interested in providing it. I told her I wasn't most foreign men. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has just said something obviously false, but means well anyway. I invited her anyway. She agreed to the following Saturday. When she arrived at the restaurant, she wore a simple white dress and minimal makeup. She was beautiful in a way that didn't require effort. The dinner was at a small restaurant near the marina. I remember the smell of grilled fish and the way the light hit the water. I remember asking her questions and watching her decide, each time, whether the answer was safe to give. She told me about her job. She told me about her family. She told me that her youngest brother wanted to study mechanical engineering, but the family couldn't afford the university fees. She told me her father's medication was expensive, and the dosage kept changing as his condition deteriorated. She said all of this the way you'd describe weather, not to convince me of anything, just fact. I remember thinking in that precise moment that this was the exact situation where I could prove something different, where I could show that not all men disappeared, where I could actually help. This is the sign I should have read as a warning. I read it as an opportunity. The first month of dating was ordinary. We went to restaurants where we could sit and talk. I learned that she'd been engaged to a Thai man once, a man named Toon, and he'd taken money from her to start a restaurant, and the restaurant had failed within 8 months, and he'd disappeared to Bangkok with what remained of her savings. She'd been saving for 3 years to replace what he'd stolen. She was still saving. Her tone when she said this wasn't bitter, it was factual. She was 26 and had already learned that men made promises and then vanished. She'd learned that the safest arrangement was one where the terms were clear from the beginning. She'd learned not to confuse protection with love. At the time, I thought I could change that calculation. By month 3, I'd moved her into my house. It was straightforward. She was living in a shared room with 3 other women who worked convenient store shifts, rotating who got the bed on which nights. My house was empty except for me. It made economic sense for both of us. I set up a bank account for her, separate from mine, and I deposited 2,000 baht each month for her personal expenses. I thought this was respectful. I thought it meant she wasn't dependent on me, just supported by me. There's a significant difference, I believed. I still believed it then. Her English improved quickly once she had time to focus on it. She attended a language school 3 afternoons a week, studying pronunciation and business communication. She got a job as a customer service representative for a hotel group, remote work, decent salary, around 30,000 baht per month. She was competent and organised in a way that suggested she'd been underutilised at the convenience store. Within 6 months, she was making good money. Not rich by Western standards, but stable, genuinely stable. This made me feel vindicated. I wasn't rescuing her. I was helping her access something she already had inside her. Within 9 months, her salary had increased to 35,000 because she'd taken on additional responsibilities, handling complaints, and coordinating with local partners. In month 9, she asked if we should get married. I asked her why. She said her father's medication had changed and the new regime was more expensive, running about 3,000 baht per month. And there were complications with his treatment that meant occasional hospitalisation that wasn't covered by the government system. She said this straightforwardly. Her family needed more support, and if we were married, she could adjust the banking arrangements to help them more directly. She didn't beg. She didn't perform gratitude in advance. She explained the situation and waited for my response, as if it might be no. I should have said no. This should have been where I recognised the structure and declined to participate in it. Instead, I said yes, but carefully. I told her I'd help with her father's immediate medical expenses, but I couldn't absorb ongoing family support indefinitely. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was trying to be clear about the margins. I was trying to be the engineer, not the fool. I told her the marriage was about us, and I needed it to stay about us. She nodded. She said she understood completely. She said her family would understand too. And at that moment, I believed her. We married quietly at a temple in Phuket on a Friday in month 10, with maybe 30 people present. Her family came. They were warm and grateful. Her father was there, a thin man with yellow eyes and a grey complexion that suggested his body was already shutting down, who thanked me in Thai that I didn't fully understand, but whose gratitude seemed genuine. Her mother brought gifts, small things, mangoes, and sticky rice wrapped in banana leaves. Her brother came, the one who wanted to study engineering. He was quiet like her. Her sisters came with their children. I remember feeling like something had clicked into place, like the structure was sound, like I'd finally built something that would hold. The money started moving the following month, just small amounts at first. Her mother needed a new medication for her arthritis, about 800 baht per month. Her uncle's truck had broken down, and he needed it for his transport business, 5,000 baht for repairs. Her youngest brother wanted to go to trade school, a good program, accredited, with real job prospects after, and the tuition was 6,000 baht per term. Each request came with explanation. Each amount seemed reasonable when I considered it individually. 2,000 here, 3,000 there, 5,000 for medical tests her father needed. What I didn't do was calculate the total. This is the thing about the rescue fantasy. It prevents you from doing basic mathematics. By month 12, I was sending nearly 4,000 Thai baht every week to her family. Her own salary was solid. My own expenses were minimal. The math still worked. It worked right up until I decided to calculate it the way I used to calculate load-bearing walls. I did the numbers on a spreadsheet one morning in month 14, and I realised I'd absorbed approximately 218,000 baht across 14 months without any structure for when it would stop. At her current salary of 35,000 per month, she should have been able to manage her family's basic expenses. Instead, the family expenses were being routed through me as if I was an automated distribution system. I was the load-bearing wall that the entire structure depended on. When I brought it up, I was careful. I didn't accuse. I didn't perform anger. I simply said that I'd miscalculated at the beginning and we needed to establish a cap. Beyond a certain point, her family would need to adjust their expectations or find alternative solutions. It was the conversation I should have had on the day she suggested marriage. It was 14 months too late. I suggested 12,000 baht per month as a sustainable maximum. Everything above that would come from her salary. She made enough to cover that if she prioritised it. I wasn't asking her to abandon her family. I was asking her to stop using me as their permanent financial solution. She didn't fight me. This should have been the tell. She simply agreed that we needed structure. We settled on the figure, 12,000 baht per month. Everything above that would come from her salary. She said this was fair. She said she'd explain it to her family, and I believed her. I remember thinking that the boundary would actually improve things. That once everyone knew what to expect, the arrangement would become sustainable. That clarity was all we needed. 2 weeks later, she stopped engaging with me in the ways that had made the arrangement tolerable. Affection evaporated. Conversation became transactional. She was present in the house, but not with me. She slept in the bed, but something had disconnected at a cellular level. I thought this was temporary frustration. I thought she needed time to adjust to the boundary. What I didn't understand was that the boundary had destroyed the illusion that this was ever about connection. The moment I made it about structure instead of rescue, I'd made it impossible for her to maintain the pretense of devotion. The transaction was over. She was just waiting for the next opportunity. 6 months later, a Canadian friend who was doing business in Phuket called me over drinks and told me something I should have already known. He told me quietly that people in her village, Rawai, had known from the beginning exactly what she was doing. Not that she was malicious. Not that she'd orchestrated some elaborate con. Simply that when you're making 35,000 baht a month and a foreign man offers to marry you and support your family indefinitely, you don't marry him because you love him. You marry him because the math is unavoidable. Everyone in the village knew this. They'd been curious how long it would take me to realise it. Some had made bets. The friend also told me that she'd been researching her rights if we divorced, and in Thai law, certain assets accumulated during marriage might be divided favourably to her if she could claim she'd contributed to them, even indirectly through managing household finances or through her salary being reinvested in the property. She had mentioned this, apparently, to her sisters. He told me this not to hurt me, but because he thought I should know what I was walking into if I stayed. He said her family was already discussing how much she might be able to claim if the separation happened. He said they'd calculated it. I didn't stay. I told her, clearly and without anger, that I'd made a mistake in my assumptions about what this marriage was. I told her I understood what she'd needed, and I understood why she'd done it. But I couldn't continue being the arrangement. I told her I would cover her family's expenses through the end of the year, but after that, the arrangement would end. I told her she was welcome to stay in the house if she wanted, but I wasn't going to pretend anymore that this was a relationship. She could take the 12,000 baht monthly, and she could find another arrangement, but not with me. She listened to all of this with her head tilted slightly, like she was calculating something. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She began planning her exit with the same clear-eyed practicality that had made her good at her job. Within 3 months, she'd moved back to her family's house in Rawai, and was being introduced to another foreign man, a German businessman, who had apparently been visiting Phuket regularly for years and was looking to set up semi-permanent living arrangements. I heard about this from the friend. I didn't watch it happen. I didn't need to. The machinery would turn the same way. Different operator, identical mechanism. What I did take with me was my ability. I could still design buildings. I could still calculate loads. I could still understand the difference between what holds and what fails. The mistake I'd made wasn't about her. It was about me. It was about believing that understanding the nature of a transaction made me immune to being the person in the transaction. It was about confusing generosity with wisdom and confusing awareness with control. The reason I'm telling you this is that I tried it again. 18 months after I left Thailand, I went to the Philippines. I told myself I'd learned the lesson. I told myself I'd be more careful. I was more careful. I set boundaries earlier. Now I asked harder questions. I even did background research. And it happened again, faster and with more precision. A different woman, this time from Cebu. A dental assistant with a sick mother and 2 younger siblings depending on her income. Different country. Identical mechanism. Within 9 months, I was calculating the same spreadsheet with different numbers in a different currency. The math was identical. Only the language was different. The structure was the same load-bearing wall, supporting the same weight, failing in the same way. The only thing that changed was my timeline. The second time, I drew the boundary after 4 months instead of 14. The second time, I saw the structure earlier. The second time, I still expected it to matter. I still thought that awareness would protect me. It didn't. Because the structure isn't about her. It's about you. It's about whether you can tolerate being ordinary. It's about whether you can be with someone who doesn't need saving, who doesn't admire you for solving her problems, who just wants companionship and half of what you make. The truth is this. There are 2 kinds of foreign men who succeed in Asia. The first kind understands that they're buying companionship, and they're honest with themselves about it. They negotiate clearly. They expect what they're paying for. They don't mistake the transaction for intimacy. They understand the margins and stay within them. They rent apartments instead of buying them. They date women without family obligations. They leave when the arrangement stops working. The second kind gives up entirely and goes back home. There's no third category. There's no middle ground where you pay enough money, but not so much that you look like a mark, where you're generous enough, but not so generous that you're funding an entire family infrastructure. That line doesn't exist. The moment you cross from being a visitor to being a solution, you're already in the transaction. What I realized, too late, and then again later, is that the rescue fantasy isn't about the woman at all. It's about you. It's about whether you can tolerate being ordinary. It's about whether you have the capacity to be with someone who doesn't need saving, who doesn't admire you for solving her problems, who just wants half of what you make and half of what you are. The women I met in Thailand and the Philippines weren't villains. They were doing the math. They were being realistic about their options. But they were making the only sensible decision available to them. What I wasn't doing was honouring those options by being realistic about myself. I wanted to be the hero. They wanted to be taken care of. Neither of us could admit what the arrangement actually was. I'm back in Canada now. I kept the house in Phuket, rented it out to other expats who are still learning the lesson I learned twice. I kept my skills. I kept enough money to retire again if I choose to. What I gave away was the idea that precision and intention could prevent the failure of something that was structurally unsound from the moment I built it. Sometimes the best engineering isn't building something that holds. Sometimes it's knowing which walls should never be constructed in the first place. It's sometimes the most honest decision you can make is to stop looking for structures that don't exist and start accepting the ones you do. The load-bearing wall was never going to support both of us equally. One of us was always going to be the foundation.